Well, one day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Now, Boaz, with whose woman you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. So wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. So stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." And when she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens next, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Y'all, Ruth would make an amazing rom-com, just saying that. Okay. All right. So before I explain the what of this chapter, I want to share a quick story about when Hurricane Ike hit. We all just survived Hurricane Beryl. Hurricane Ike was a little crazy. There was a lot of damage to the city. We were without power, without water. And during that time, one of my good friends, I was in college, one of my good guy friends came over and brought water and food, and my dad stood there at the door and gave me a good wink. I was like, "Ew, Dad, ew, friend zone." But he was so impressed by this gentleman friend coming to bring me supplies. So you know true love when you see it in action, right? Whether it's romantic or not. But there's a reason why the command, "Love your neighbor as yourself," is revolutionary. There is a reason why the Christian gospel of God's sacrificial love is so compelling. So we've been in the story of Ruth, where we have seen this kind of love, this Hesed love, in action. So in Ruth 1, we saw Ruth's Hesed love for Naomi, a love that is sacrificial and faithful. In Ruth 2, we saw Boaz's Hesed love for Ruth and Naomi, a love that is radically generous. And today in Ruth 3, here's the hurricane. From all these characters, we see that Hesed love means looking out for the good of others. Hesed love is sacrificial, it's faithful, it's radically generous, and it intentionally looks out for the good of others. So this morning we're going to see how each character does that and how that applies to us. So first, Naomi looks out for Ruth. So we see this right off the bat in verse 1, where it says, "One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, 'My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for.'" And y'all, that's always been Naomi's intent. Since Ruth 1, she told Orpah and Ruth to go back to their hometown, remarry. But now that they settled in Bethlehem, Naomi wants to provide Ruth with the safety and security of marriage, which in this historical cultural moment, married women were better protected from exploitation or oppression. So I just love this. Naomi puts on her matchmaker hat and she gets to work. And she crafts a plan to set up Ruth with Boaz. I like to call it Naomi's plan to get a man. So step 1, ladies, take a bath, put on perfume. Okay, so actually, that sounds nice, but this is actually a traditional pre-wedding ritual. So by telling Ruth to do this, she's kind of subliminally saying, we're going to hit you up, okay? Take a bath, put on perfume, and then take off your widow garments and put on fresh clothes. So in the cultural norm, she would have been wearing widow clothes. But earlier than normal, Naomi is telling her, take those off. Let's tell Boaz that you're available. Okay, and then step 3, while Boaz is sleeping, uncover his feet and lie down. Super saucy, isn't it? Okay, you're like, wait, what is happening here? Yeah, I was really confused too. But that's what Naomi said. And to us modern readers, this whole thing is a little confusing. But what's happening is that Ruth is taking a huge risk because Boaz could interpret these actions one of 3 ways. First, Boaz could interpret Ruth's actions to be those of a common prostitute and accept her invitation. I mean, after all, these are the dark days of the judges. Or, secondly, Boaz could interpret Ruth's actions as those of a prostitute, but shoo her off because he's a good Israelite man. Or, Boaz could interpret Ruth's actions as she really intends, as a marriage proposal, and respond favorably. So, if you think about it, Naomi's plan to get a man, it's really, really risky. Because how is Boaz going to respond? Will he overlook how crazy this plan is? A woman proposing to a man? A field worker proposing to the field owner? A foreigner proposing to a native Israelite? But what's crazy, you guys, is that this risk, it actually gives us a glimpse into Naomi's growth. Remember the Naomi we met in Ruth 1? She was bitter. She lamented that God was against her. But throughout chapters 2 and 3, she has been experiencing the Hesed love of Ruth and of Boaz. And that love, I think, is healing her heart. Through their Hesed love towards her, she is growing more and more confident in the hidden hand of God. Through their Hesed love towards her, her faith is being restored to the point where she stops focusing only on herself, but begins looking out for the good of others. Her Hesed love tank is filling up, and now she is able to overflow into others, even if it means taking a huge risk by sending Ruth to Boaz. And so that's the takeaway. Hesed love takes risks for the good of others. You know, loving others the way God calls us to involves risk. It's not just happy, happy, safe, safe. I mean, just think about the way that God designed his beloved community. Forgive, not just 7 times, but 70 times 7. Cross cultural lines. Break through societal norms. Sacrifice and give of yourself. Put yourself in vulnerable positions with radical generosity. But that's the power of Hesed love. Hesed love means looking out for the good of others, and sometimes it involves great risk. So let's continue our story and see how Naomi's risky plan shakes out. And as we do, we're actually going to see that Ruth looks out for the good of Naomi. So Ruth does what Naomi tells her to do. Kinda. Remember, Naomi says in verse 4, "Go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." So Boaz wakes up and asks, "Who are you?" I guess he couldn't see too well in the dark. And Ruth says, "It's me." But she doesn't just sit there and wait for Boaz to tell her what to do. She makes an insanely risky move of her own. She initiates a bold move of her own making. Listen to what she says in verse 9. She says, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." What does that mean? Well, you may not know this, but that phrase, "spread the corner of your garment over me," it was a very popular marriage proposal at the time. We should try it these days. Spread the corner of your garment over me. Okay, in the Near East, it was customary for a man to cover a woman with his garment as a symbol of a new relationship, of them becoming one, as a commitment of the husband to prepare or provide for his wife. And that's exactly what Naomi had hoped for back in verse 1. But Ruth is the one who is audacious enough to name it in a request. Now that second phrase, "since you are a guardian redeemer of our family," it references Israelite law that says if a man died, his next of male kin was obligated to marry his widowed wife. But then if that brother died, the next relative was to marry his widowed wife. And God's intent with this law was to protect the widow and the family line. So y'all, this is really bold. If you were like a reader back in the day and you read this, you'd be like, "Oh, like clutch the pearls, she did what?" And here's what biblical scholar Block says about this. Here is a servant demanding that the boss marry her. A Moabite making the demand of an Israelite, a woman making the demand of a man, a poor person making the demand of a rich man. Was this an act of foreign naivete or a daughter-in-law's devotion to her mother-in-law, or another sign of the hidden hand of God? From a natural perspective, the scheme was doomed from the beginning as a hopeless gamble, but it worked. Spoiler alert. The story has a happy ending. But what we are witnessing is Hesed love in action. What we are seeing is that Hesed love asks boldly for the good of others. Now, what motivated Ruth to make this bold move was not just her own security, but also that of Naomi's. If she can get married, she can keep taking care of her mother-in-law. Her heart is full of this sacrificial, faithful love and devotion to Naomi. And for us, loving others the way that God calls us to involves risk, even the risk to ask boldly for the good of others. And I'm so grateful that we live in a country that is a democratic republic. It's not perfect by any means, but we have the opportunity to ask boldly for the good of others. When we think about all of God's people. That is the power of Hesed love. We're not just meant to look out for ourselves. We are called to be God's beloved community that looks out for the good of others, sometimes with great risks and bold asks. So let's wrap up the story, and let's see how Boaz finally responds. And Boaz, where we see Boaz looks out for the good of Ruth. Well, Boaz responds the way that you would hope an Old Testament Prince Charming would. He doesn't interpret Ruth's actions as those of a prostitute. He gets that he's being proposed to, and he blesses her. He esteems her. He tells her that she's a Proverbs 31 woman, and that he'd be happy to marry her. The story goes on to tell us that there is a closer relative than him who could fulfill this guardian redeemer law. And the faithful, God-fearing man that he is, he drops everything on his schedule that day to figure it out. And next week, we'll find out how that pans out. But what's crazy, you guys, is that Boaz didn't have to do this. He was just minding his own business when a stranger proposes marriage and asks him to take on huge responsibilities. But instead of reprimanding her, this busy man who is managing a barley harvest season, by the way, he drops everything to help. Not only that, but he sends Ruth home with a bundle of barley so that Ruth and Naomi can eat. Can we say dreamy or what, right? So through his actions, Boaz shows us again that Hesed love provides radically for the good of others. So there we have it. 3 angles of Hesed love displayed through Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Through their actions, we have seen that Hesed love means looking out for the good of others, sometimes with great risks and bold asks, and through radical provision. Y'all, this is the Hesed love of God's beloved community. It's incredibly beautiful. It's what we want for ourselves, and it's what God gives to us. God took incredible risk by sending his son, knowing that Jesus would die for our sins. But with resurrection power displayed for the world to see, God also asks boldly that we, his beloved community, display that same kind of Hesed love to the world. He boldly asks that we pick up our crosses too and radically provide for his world, to look out for the good of others. And you guys